So there was a fight that was the fight of the night, awesome fight that we saw last Saturday between Julian Erosa and
Yeah.
Steven Peterson. Now, this question where I saw it was it mentioned that fight specifically, but in terms of what this question really got boiled down to, I don't necessarily think that fight like fits. Like as good of a fight as it was, as fun as it was, I don't think Erosa versus Peterson's like a fight of the year.
Hmm.
So because of that, the question was, Dominic, do sloppy brawls deserve to be discussed for fight of the year? Fights that are entertaining for the amount of output and the durability shown by both fighters, but completely lack any and all defense.
Yeah, I'm gonna go yes. I'm a sucker for some sloppy brawls here and again, and truthfully, what leads me to that, and it's funny because the fight of the year again. I already said this for 2021 for me was Peter Yan versus Corey Sandhagen, which is one of the most technical
It's
five-round
probably the
MMA
most
bouts.
highly skilled
Yeah,
technical fight of 2021.
yeah, and that's what took the cake for me. But here I am justifying. You know what? Give me a sloppy brawl here or there, and that's because Noah. I view Justin Gaethje and Michael Chandler as a sloppy brawl, if I'm being honest. A little bit cleaner than Julian Erosa and Steven Peterson, for what it's worth. But I mean, at the end of the day, that's kind of how I viewed that fight. And it was awesome, by the way. Don't get me wrong. And that's why I think, it doesn't have to be the biggest name guys. It doesn't have to be the tit for tat, the kicks, the elbows, the crisp right hands. I think it can be sloppy. I think it can be blood and guts, war. And it's that idea of two guys or girls, by the way, leaving it all in the cage at the end of that when that horn sounds. And that's what matters to me most for the fight of the year discussions.
You might be right about Gaethje Chandler, but I was thinking more of that fight in the PFL Championship.
Mm.
What I
Bruno
can't remember.
Capoloza and Ante Dilia, too.
Yep. That fight to me, it didn't end up on our top four for fight of the year, but it was like the last one cut.
Yeah, it was
And
right
it-
there. Yeah.
And it was on most surprising fight of the year. So
Yes.
basically, yes. My answer to this question is yes. There is you don't see as many sloppy brawls nowadays because the skill level's just gotten so refined. I mean, look at Forrest Griffin versus Stephen Bonnar. That's considered one of the best fights of all time.
Yep.
The sloppiest of brawls. I mean, no defense, no combination that you put together twice. I mean, these guys were just throwing leather and just trying to make the other guy quit. That was,
Yeah.
I mean, awesome fight. The fight that saved the company. Awesome durability, intense show of heart. But again, it's sloppy, not the most skilled fight in the world.
Yeah.
And there's been a lot of those in the history of the company, and I think there's a place for that.
Yes.
You don't see it as much nowadays because again, the skill level's gotten to such a level that even in divisions like heavyweight, you got guys like Cyril Gane and Francis Ngannou and Stipe having complete skill sets nowadays. But man, every once in a while, when you get in that rock'em sock'em robot type fight where two guys just stand in the middle and they just throw at one another, that it just puts a smile on my face. And maybe Gaethje Chandler is that fight. It's about as much of that fight as you can get nowadays. Like it's still highly skilled, but sloppy in the sense of like they kind of threw caution to the wind, especially Michael Chandler, and said, "Fuck it, let's have a fight."
Yeah, I mean, I think it's that sweet spot right in the middle is a little bit of Jan Sandhagen. We pull some of that in. We pull some of Gaethje Chandler, mix that together, and you're working with a masterpiece. Because again, you kind of said we don't see many sloppy brawls, which is true. You don't see as many these days, like the Bonnar versus Griffin, but we still don't see a ton of like the Jan Sandhagens either. It's like
That's true.
you get right in the middle.
It's
a mixture.
Tough. It's tough because I think, and this might be a hot take, I think the average fight in the UFC is closer to being Jan versus Sandhagen than being Gaethje versus Chandler or Bonnar versus Griffin
or
like
Erosa
I
versus
think,
Peterson.
again, the skill level
Yeah.
has hit a point where most fights, even ones that are a little dull, again, Strickland or Manson was a bit of a dull fight. But you could still appreciate the skill that Sean Strickland really showed in that fight.
Yes.
And you know what fight I thought of when you're talking about sloppy brawls? A one-rounder, all-timer, Chet Congo versus Pat Barry is one that I
Holy
thought of.
shit. That fight
That's
takes
a
the cake.
fight. Hey, that's a fight. You know, like if I had money on Chet Congo, that's me reffing that fight. like
Yes.
I'm like, oh, he's still moving a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I just,
yeah.
I just
like
thought that was a good one to mention here as well. But yeah, I think maybe there's even more to this discussion, Dominic, because really it's just there's no like there's not like a list or like a criteria for what makes a great fight.
Mm-hmm.
My favorite fight of 2021 was a one-sided beatdown for the most part. Volkanovski Ortega.
Yeah.
But that's not, if you just look at it at that face value, you're kind of like, why? But you just have to watch the fight.
It's those moments, you know.
The moments, Ortega nearly coming from out of nowhere to finish that fight in the third round, multiple submission attempts, Volkanovski having to hold on, fight out of them, really tight against one of the best Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioners in the UFC.
Yeah.
And I mean, the amount of, again, heart, durability Ortega showed is scary in that fight. And the amount of skill Volkanovski had, and he's like, why won't you just die? Like, just, you know, it's like, it tells such an amazing story. But that's why, like, there's no recipe for what makes a great fight. Like, yes, you get two highly skilled opponents and you hope that you get a Jan versus Sandhagen every time out. But sometimes the you know, we were at one time, Dominic, I don't know if I can stand by it anymore, but we were one time a proponent of the no crowds for the UFC fights.
We were.
But I've seen fights that have been improved upon by the crowd and also lessened. Just going to mention the fight that went after Gaethje versus Chandler.
Yep.
Billy Q and Shane Burgos. The crowd was completely dead for it because they were just exhausted from what they had just seen. And because of that, that fight doesn't get the credit it deserves, the love it deserves. So as you had two guys fighting their asses off, but if the fans didn't buy into it, then you just kind of are like, well, that was really good. But if that fans were as into that fight as they were for Gaethje Chandler, we'd be like probably debating which one was better that night, you know?
Yeah, 100%. Because on any other card, that fight does get fight of the night. You know what I mean? So it's crazy.
And then there's kind of the thing that we always struggle with at the end of the year, not to keep this conversation.
No, you're
going, but
fine.
it's an interesting discussion. You know, and I think we both tend to agree on this. We tend to evaluate for fight of the year. If a fight goes 5 rounds or 3 rounds, it goes to the decision. We tend to put those higher than Yuri Prohaska versus Dominic Reyes, which was an amazing war, but it only went 2 rounds.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
I'm not
that's
sure.
very true.
And it's like, is that fair? Like, I don't know. For someone, they're like, why would I, you know, holding my attention for 25 minutes, for 15 minutes with no knockout, no submission is not my thing. I would rather watch a fight that gets ended in 7 minutes and a brutal knockout. Like, I love knockouts. I love submissions. But in fight of the year discussions, I always tend to view higher the epics, you know, the godfathers of the Citizen Kanes of MMA for that year. You know, they're long, like, you know, when you're looking at like movies, it's like they're long, Lord of the Rings trilogy, that kind of stuff, where it's like they're long, but they're worth it. You may not watch them all the time, but when you do, you're like, man, that is a damn good fight.
Yeah, you know, as a fan, of course I love the knockouts, I love the submissions, and maybe that's why they don't come into play in the fight of the year discussions, is because at the end of the day, there is a convincing winner. They stopped their opponent, but these ones that go 3 rounds, that go 5 rounds, you're on the edge of your seat. You're waiting. Something's going to happen. Someone's going to get knocked out. And then they get knocked down, but the fight doesn't get finished. They get back up and they storm back across the cage, and you're like, holy shit, what is going on? And then it does go to the judges' scorecards. And even sometimes we get so lucky to where you have no idea who even won that fight. So then it makes it even more fun. So I think that does play the biggest factor, but it is something worth mentioning, especially like What if there is a fight that a championship fight, for example, it's 2-2, it's close for 4 rounds, but then there's a finish in the 5th. Does that maybe squeak in there for the fight of the year discussion?
I mean, if we were doing this podcast in 2019, Usman versus Covington probably would have been up there.
Right. Yeah, very true.
And that's also a fight that kind of a sloppy brawl, if I'm being honest.
And that was the 2 top dogs in the division, you know?
Yeah, just at the time, not very refined strikers, and they had a kickboxing fight, 2 wrestlers, and it was awesome. I mean, there's totally a place for that. Give me that every week.
Exactly.
Give me that.
Give me 4
Give me
rounds.
Sandhagen. Like, I'll take all of it.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. Don't you just love MMA, Noah? You love the fighting. Holy shit.
I do.